So, I've hosted a few different drawing telephone challenges before, which certainly led to some interesting results. But in this video, it's all about animations, so let me explain how this works. I'm gonna make a 1 to 2 second animation. The next person recreates that. The third person recreates the second animation, then we continue on making a long chain and see what we end up with after 30. Now, single images tend to go wrong very quickly, as you saw, so you can only imagine how much an animation is gonna transform. Even if it's only a second or two. Maybe it'll simplify, or maybe something completely new will emerge. With all that said, let's make the first animation. Now what we want is something kind of simple and kind of short, because obviously a lot of people are going to have to try and copy this, or copy copies of a certain number of copies. But yeah, something complicated would just be unreasonable. But you want like a simple character. This is kind of a typical thing I do. And you know, you want it to be doing something kind of easy, like this is not what I'm actually doing, but you know, we could have like, let me just move all those down. We could have like a jump. You know, that's a very simple animation. It kind of looks like a jump. And I do want it to be somewhat interesting. Anyway, I kind of have to work this out, so here's a time lapse. So I'm going with sort of a droplet character that's going to bounce up and do a 360. First, just getting the body and legs down. Nice and squashy with some depth to the legs as they spin around. He lands back down in the same spot so it can loop. After that, I added in the eyes. They trail behind a bit with some squash and stretch for that fun cartoony effect. I also added some shine. For the arms, I considered claws but went with something more basic. They spin around with the hands flopping behind, and this will sell the 360 more. I put a little stick in his hand to add more chaos to the mix. I was curious to see if it would last or what it would turn into. Finally, some shading to make things more interesting and give it a polished look. I think this is a good starting point. Quick and fun, simple enough. I really should have had a wind up on the arms, but no big deal. So let's see what the next person does with this. Okay, there's one major difference here. I don't know if you remember, but the original didn't have a mouth. I actually think this is a good thing, because it makes it more interesting. The animation itself was pretty close, just stylized differently. Nice job. This one's by Mitch, who's been in some of my other videos. It's even more joyful and snappy. We're also starting to see it go off axis a little bit. Now you can see that orbit being pushed further out. You would imagine that's going to continue.
Sketch done. It definitely needs cleaning up in some areas, but it's looking alright.
My name is Boo Radley Boo, and this is the second time I've contributed to one of Science Sandwich's projects. For my reference frames, I used VLC Player to progress one frame at a time, and I animated the entire sequence in Photoshop, which is my primary animation software. This animation took me a lot longer than I anticipated. I think I spent a little bit too long trying to get things just so initially. Towards the end, I was a little bit freer and less picky, but without sacrificing quality. I actually managed to squeeze this animation in while on a crunch for a music video animation, and feel free to check out my animations, video essays, and music on my channel. Cheers.
Alright, we're coming to the last 5 animations now, and I'm gonna save those for the final reveal. I do want to say, there's going to be various levels of effort put in and stylization versus trying to accurately copy it. I don't want to see you guys roasting anyone for not, mimicking it exactly. There are some very stellar animations in here, by the way, which we're about to see. So here is my original animation, and now we can watch all 30 in a row and see how it compares. So if we compare the first and the last, I think the most immediately obvious difference is the color scheme. We started with basically white with some shading, then it's a bunch of different solid colors. Still blue though. Now the next most obvious difference is the speed. I only said color first because that's what you'll notice in the first few frames, but we went from a quick spin to a pause mid-air before several turns. I counted 5, which would make it an 1800. Honestly an impressive feat, maybe the greatest athletic achievement of all time. If I double the speed of number 30, we can get a closer comparison, but they're still very out of sync. Number 1 jumps later and lands much earlier. Overall though, the two animations aren't really that different. It still looks like a drop of liquid with arms, legs, and 2 big shiny eyes, jumping up and doing a spin. I kinda prefer how it ended up than what I did. There's more going on minus the stick. And I love the exaggeration. Would be an interesting starting point. But like I said, not too different. Unlike when I've done this with drawings. Those have, so far, always led to unrecognizable chaos. I thought that would be the case even more so with an animation, but I can see a few reasons why not. It could be a difference in skill level or the specific thing we started with, but let's put that aside. With a drawing, it's easier to misinterpret what you see. A moving subject will give you more context, more frames to work out what you're looking at. This frame could be a lot of things. The whole animation is much more clear. There can also be accidental lines or dots added to a drawing that become part of it, muddying the waters a bit. Another thing is the drawings were more detailed, so it would be fun to see how this sort of thing goes with a more complicated animation. Although this already took over a month. Alright, let's go over some key changes. So obviously the mouth got added immediately. It went through some different designs, but by 12 it was closed and on 28 it opened back up. The stick was gone by number 5. I would say 18 or 19 is where it goes from a 360 to ambiguously more than that. Then 20 took a very artistic interpretation, and the spin is essentially a blur from now on. 27 is a cool pixel animation, and I actually doubled the speed for the compilation, so that's where most of the slowing down came from. I got it as a GIF, so I'm not sure if it actually came through at the intended speed. Then on 28 there's a choice made about the number of spins. Cool animation with the transparency and splashes as well. Of course a lot of things changed and I could break it down for hours, but this was a fun challenge, and despite everything, the core elements of the original still remain at the end. Big thank you to everyone who contributed to this. Hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you soon.